Welcome back everyone to Now That's What I Call Gaming. If you're new here, make sure you smash that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a second of any of my great gaming or model building content. I know I haven't really done many game reviews this year. It's been kind of a crazy year with a lot of stuff going on. But with Halloween coming up, I thought, why don't we get a game review out this year, at least one? So rather than go back to the world of survival horror, which I did last year, I thought we'd take a look at another great classic game. The practically perfect, yet frustrating platformer from Konami. That's right, I'm talking about the one and only Castlevania.
Castlevania was released on the Famicom Disk System in 1986 and was ported to the NES in 1987 by Konami. You play as Simon Belmont, tasked with killing the master of all evil, the vampire lord Count Dracula. To beat him, you have to first traverse his castle, fighting through hordes of evil creatures and fighting fearsome bosses, armed with only your whip and your wits. This classic platformer is separated into 6 different stages. Unlike future games in the series, this game is pretty linear and straightforward. You follow the stage, get to a boss, beat the boss, rinse and repeat. Simple. But this game is hardly simple. In fact, it's one of the games that coins the phrase Nintendo hard. Konami made sure that these 6 stages would push you to your absolute limits. Like many games of the time, the first couple of stages begin pretty easy and straightforward. Enemies take 1 hit to kill, they don't do as much damage to you. Hell, even the first couple of bosses are easy. But then this game gets hard. And I mean very hard. For one thing, you always get knocked back when you get hit. Now in earlier stages this isn't such a big deal, but in later stages you're usually fighting next to a pit. And getting hit knocks you right back into that pit. You can be at full health and find yourself dying after just 1 hit more and more often. This is the part where that difficulty really comes to a head. The hallway before death. Yes, Death himself takes orders from Dracula. That should tell you just how badass Dracula is. But before you get to him, you have to traverse a long hallway teeming with a combination of knights and Medusa heads. The knights throw axes at either a high level or a low level. Each hit takes off 1/4 of your health. The knights each take 9 hits. So you have to juggle dodging the Medusa heads, fending off axes, beating the knights, and that's all before you have to face the Grim Reaper, Death himself. It is difficult, but in that special way that makes you want to keep going. You eventually start learning the various enemy patterns and you do adapt. You get unlimited continues, so you have no real reason to give up. It's that special kind of challenge that's very difficult to balance. Fair, but very frustrating. You start thinking you're getting ahead, then all of a sudden you make 1 mistake and get knocked back and have to do a large chunk all over again. But at least during these frustrating times, your ears are treated to some of the most amazing music on the NES. The tunes of this game are as iconic as the game itself. Every piece of music in every stage instantly puts you into that gothic monster mindset. Speaking of monsters, this game stands as an homage to all of the great movie monsters of the past. Besides Death and Dracula, you'll face off against a Gorgon, basically Medusa, Frankenstein's monster, a pair of mummies, Gilman from Creature from the Black Lagoon, zombies, bats, hunchbacks. It's like a mashup of all the big movie monsters in one game. I cannot give this game enough praise. It's one of the best games ever made and should be at the top of everyone's lists. If you haven't played it yet, you need to.
Now, for many years, this was the only way to play this classic game. I mean, sure, there was Super Castlevania 4, which a lot of people at the time considered kind of a remake of the original Castlevania. But recently there's others I've watched on YouTube that have made the compelling argument that it's actually a continuation of the series. And the big thing they show is the grave from the beginning of Super Castlevania 4 is the same gravestone we see at the end of Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. But in Japan, however, things were a little different.
Castlevania Chronicles was first released on the Sharp X68000 in 1993 and on the PlayStation in 2001. I know, that's quite a big gap between releases. The X68000 is a Japanese computer that never got a release outside of the Land of the Rising Sun. But there is a new mini version of that console coming out, so it's definitely something we might take a look at. Some point in the future, that is. The PlayStation version actually has two different versions of the game. The original X68000 version and a special arranged version, which gives you new character models, new backgrounds, and new music. Like most remakes, this remake adds new stages, new bosses, and also new hazards. The music is given more than a minor overhaul here. Hell, they even include some music from future Castlevania games in this one. Fans of the series will instantly recognize Bloody Tears, and you'll also note the Stage 1 theme from Super Castlevania 4 at the end of the game. But the original version of this game is hard. I mean, it takes the difficulty of the NES game and dials it up to an 11. The enemies hit harder earlier. You'll find yourself begging for a pork chop before each level ends. Even though the game has unlimited continues, you will still get highly frustrated as you continually get yourself killed. Arrange mode is really where this version shines. The difficulty of the original mode is lessened, especially since you can modify things like difficulty level, maximum lives, you can even turn off the time limit. Even on normal mode though, enemies don't hit as hard as they do in original mode, at least not as early. It's more fair and balanced, but it's also still frustratingly difficult. Where arrange mode shines is in its presentation. Unlike the original, which is basically a graphical upgrade with extra levels, Arrange does everything. The stages look darker and more gothic. Simon looks more like his currently accepted version, and the music, my god, just listen to it. Let's take a look at Bloody Tears. Even though it's not in the NES version, it is still an iconic piece of music from the Castlevania series. Let's compare it across each version of the game. Make no mistake, this game is incredible. A true love letter for Castlevania fans, worthy of a playthrough, if you can get it.
So with a look at both versions of the game out there, which do I recommend? Well, that's a topic where there's a lot to discuss.
Let's begin with the NES version. A cart-only version of this game will run you a little over $26. It was re-released on the Game Boy Advance as part of the classic NES series, so you could get your Castlevania fix on the go. But it's even more expensive, clocking in at a minimum of $31 for a cart-only copy. It was included as one of the 30 games on the NES Classic, which will run you about $70 if you can find one, but you'll also get 29 other great NES games. More recently, for modern consoles, it was released as part of the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, which you can get on pretty much every modern console and PC for about $20. Plus with that, you get 7 other classic Castlevania games. Castlevania Chronicles, that's a different story. This game was only ever released on the PlayStation, and it was also released towards the end of the PlayStation's life cycle. So because of that, it didn't get as widely released, and it became very rare. A disc-only copy of this game will run you $130, and it only goes higher from there. If you have a PS3 or a PS Vita, you might be able to pick the game up on one of those for around $6, but that's not going to be an option forever. And that's really it. Those are the only possible ways you can play Castlevania Chronicles.
So with all these different ways to play, which version do I recommend the most? I'm gonna have to go with the Anniversary Collection. It does mean you're not gonna get the prettiest graphics, you're still gonna get just the 8-bit games and the 8-bit graphics. But you know what? Graphics does not make gameplay good or bad. And for $20 to get 8 amazing Castlevania games, the value for your money, I can't really stress enough, is the best way to go. So that's a look at the amazing game that is Castlevania, and surprisingly, it's another one where I have to recommend you get the compilation with all the originals on it, as opposed to going out of your way to get this remake. It's just a better value for your dollar, and it's a better experience overall. I will say this, though, Konami, if you're listening, you want to make a quick buck on old games, you need to release a compilation with both Castlevania Chronicles and at the very least, release it with Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, a game that was never released anywhere else other than the Wii. You did that and you charged about $15-$30 for that, I'd buy that in a second, and I'm sure many people here would too. So what do you guys all think of Castlevania? Do you have fond memories of being curled up in your blanket in the late hours of the night playing it, where your fingers are getting raw and your adrenaline's pumping as you try to beat Dracula? Or did this game just constantly kick your ass and never stop? Let me know in the comments below, and in the meantime, thank you for watching Now That's What I Call Gaming.